right at 5. So this time I'll call the meeting to order for April 5th, 2021. Welcome to the Coeur d'Alene School District 271 board meeting. Would gentlemen please remove their hats and everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I will introduce our participants this evening. To my far right is Casey Morrisroe, trustee. Back behind him is Lynn Town, our clerk of the board. To my immediate right is Miss Lisa May, trustee. To my far left is Tambra Pickford, trustee. To my immediate left is Rebecca Smith, trustee. I am Jennifer Brumley, chair. And then far over on my left is Dr. Stephen Cook, our superintendent. Public comment on district-related items is scheduled near the start of this meeting. Please sign in on the sheet provided at the entrance door. Because of the diversity of issues, members of the board will not respond to public comment made during tonight's meeting. Instead, issues may be recorded and referred to the proper staff person for follow-up. Comments may also be submitted to the board by email at trustees@cdaschools.org or in writing through the clerk. So at this time, do I have a motion to amend the current agenda to remove the executive session?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, do I have a motion to approve the amended agenda? Discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. We will start this evening with board recognition. We do not have any specific presentation of plaques or any particular individuals present. What the board wanted to do this evening is just make a statement and a thank you to our community for its continued unwavering support of our levy. It was a very stressful day for many in this district on the day of the election, and it was a day of stress relief and in many ways excitement for our students the day after the levy. So the board just wanted to tell the members of the community and those that have continued to support, be it parents, be it just business owners, individuals in the community, those participating in the Yes campaign and all of the work that they did in support of the levy. We just wanted to publicly acknowledge those individuals. And I don't know that anybody of the board came planning to say anything, but if anyone here, any board members wanted to add to that, please do. Okay. All right. I will move on. We also tonight we actually have Board of Trustees comments. The L4l Training occurred in the last month, and Ms. Smith and myself were able to participate with that with the district. So I'm going to turn over to Rebecca and let her make a few comments.
Yeah, I think both Jen and I got to participate in the L4l training, and that's the Learning for Leaders training when all of the principals and the administrators come together, and it was really fabulous. And I said to Jen afterwards, we need to make sure that the board's aware of the really incredible work that happened on that day. With the facilitator that came in, there was work done to take the strategic plan and to take the portrait of a graduate work and apply it to each school and to carry out how their school is going to now implement the plans to carry that out. There was affirmation from Jen and I there just to say, we're going to carry this work on. No matter what happens after Dr. Cook leaves, that we as a board and a district are committed to this work. And so it was really, really tremendous. It was tremendous to see the buy-in and the hard work put forth by the principals as well, to take that and then to implement so much of that work as well. So wanted to make sure that all of us as a board were really aware that that work was happening.
And I'd just add that there's going to be some hard work that needs to happen, and some of the changes that were talked about are not easy. And so part of the reason for Rebecca and I being there was to make sure that from the top down, it's understood that we want to see these changes, we expect these changes, and that we want to keep moving forward in a way that is promoting the portrait of a graduate, is looking at all of our frameworks and how we implement those. And this was just kind of the start of all of it, but it is exciting, and we wanted to share that with you guys. Okay, I will next take up our high school student body reports, and it looks like we have Lake City High School first. Or not. Do we have Lake City High School here? Oh, it's coming. Okay.
Good evening, esteemed board chair, honorable trustees, superintendent Cook, and district administration. My name is Jordan Lyon, and I am the ASB vice president at Lake City High School. Last month was a busy one at Lake City. We would first like to congratulate some of our amazing T-Wolf athletes. Matthew Wickham was our school's first two-time state wrestling champion. Zach McDonald got second place at Wrestling State, and our boys basketball team placed second at state as well. We are so proud of our sports programs and our coaches. We also had 6 students qualify for state speech and debate, 8 students qualify for state band and orchestra, and 6 students qualify for state choir. We would like to give a huge congrats to them and their teachers, Miss Newman, Miss Seymour, Mr. Stanford, and Miss Funheller for their amazing work. We also had a spirit week during the last week before break called Road Trip to Spring Break, which was a lot of fun for our students and staff. For this month, we're focused on getting our juniors ready for the SAT on the 13th. Our college prep classes have been prepping since the start of the semester, so our students are feeling more confident and ready to go. We also have ASB elections coming up on the 23rd, and we're excited to be able to introduce the new ASB officers to your next month's meeting. We're waiting for more guidance on spring events, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to have at least some fun activities for our seniors before the end of the year. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight, and we'll see you next month.
Okay, thank you, Lake City High School. Next, we have K-Tech.
My name's Jfac, and I go to K-Tech, and I'm in the CNA program. And my home school is Coeur High School. So about the program, before spring break, we just finished clinicals, which is where we either went to Kootenai Health or we went to Coeur d'Alene Long-Term Care Facility, and we followed, pretty much shadowed another CNA. And so we could just help with our skills get ready for what we have in about 25 days is our certification, which is a test, which is a 2-part test. It's a skills test, which is what we're working on now, to where we get like a scenario and we have to run through it. And then after that, once we pass it, we then have a written test, which is about 100 question test. And then if we pass all that, then we'll get a certified nursing assistant is what we get. And so then what this program kind of means to me, it means a lot. It helped me get more into the medical field, which is what I've wanted to do for a while now. And it helps me get the baseline for what I want to do for the future. And then after high school, I plan to actually go into the Navy as a Navy corpsman. So then what they've told me multiple times is this will help me when I get to my schooling, and then it'll help me hopefully like get a higher level after all my schooling, because I'll pretty much know everything already by that time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much from K-Tech. And so our last school tonight is Coeur d'Alene High School.
Good evening, esteemed board chair, honorable trustees, superintendent Cook, district administration, and valued community members. My name is Lexi Hildreth, and I am the ASB treasurer. With me tonight, we have Alexi Wilson, our ASB secretary, and Holly Hudson, our ASB president. We are excited to move forward through these coming months with the warmer temperatures and nearing the end of the school year. We have a lot of exciting, fun events planned, and we're excited to put it on.
My name is Holly Hudson, and I'm the ASB president at Coeur d'Alene High School. This past month, CHS kickstarted their spring sports. Our boys and girls golf team both took home a trophy at their first tournament. Baseball and softball both won their home openers, and we're excited to see what our track and tennis teams will take home this year. Our drama department just started their ticket sales for their spring play called Peter and Wendy. A lot of excitement has built up this past month, and I think a lot more is going to build up in the future.
Hi, my name is Alexi Wilson. I'm the ASB secretary here at CHS. We would like to offer congratulations to the following CHS orchestra students for qualifying to compete in the Idaho State Solo Competition, which will be held in early May. For violin, we have Rylan Daly, viola, Victoria Hearn, and cello, Sage Peterson. We would also like to congratulate our very own Lillian Smith for receiving a $20,000 college scholarship from the Coca-Cola Scholars Foundation.
We have a lot to look forward to in these next upcoming months as we near the end of the school year, and we're so thankful for all of your guys' help and support. We hope you had a wonderful spring break, and we look forward to presenting to you next month.
Thank you, Coeur d'Alene High School, and as always, thank you for all of the students that present and bring that information to us. Our next agenda item is our Sag Leadership Report, and as I understand, we have our chair and our vice chair here. I have your ladies' names up here, but I'll let you introduce yourselves, okay?
All right. Thank you so much. My name is Helene O'Brien. I'm the chair for the Student Advisory Group.
I guess my name is Ainsley Brigham. I'm actually the third chair for the Student Advisory Group. The vice chair, Austin, he unfortunately could not be here tonight, but I know that he is looking forward to speaking at next month's meeting. But I am really happy to be here, and I'm so excited for this opportunity tonight.
Yeah. Ooh, sorry. Okay. So far this year, the Student Advisory Group, or SAG, has been a highly dedicated group of students. It's K through 12, so it's just people, elementary, middle, and high school, all ready to represent their schools and our district as a whole. We've spoken about a lot of issues that we just see in our own schools, and it's nice to get like a student perspective and to collaborate with students from other grades and other groups that you might not get the opportunity to talk with as often. We've done campaigns and projects in our individual schools to kind of get input from the students that we're intending to represent. And that's run by the SAG members, and they've done it in some of the elementary schools and some of the middle schools as well. And then, yeah, as the official representatives of this group, me and Ainsley and Austin, we're so glad to have the opportunity to be here with you today and in the future. Thank you so much.
Well, that was quick. Thank you, ladies, for the update, and we'll look forward to seeing more of you in the future. All right, next is our CEA report, and we did have a written report in the board book, and I understand that Ms. Ziegler is not attending this evening, and so anybody have questions or comments on her report? Okay, then we will move on to our next agenda item, which is public comment. Town, do we have public comment this evening? All right, it looks like we have a couple folks scheduled for tonight. So I just need to we haven't said this or read this in a long time. So just a little announcement before public comment. I want to remind the public that while this is a meeting of the Board of Trustees that takes place in public, it's not a meeting with the public. It is a meeting of the board to conduct district business. The board does allow some limited public comment on district-related items. Those wishing to address the board during this public comment period are limited to one comment not to exceed 3 minutes. If you have additional comments that you would like to be presented to the board, you may provide those comments in writing to the clerk of the board, Lynn Town. Ms. Town will ensure that the board receives this additional commentary. Please keep in mind that the board members will not respond to public comment. If I determine that an individual statement is too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, or repetitive, I may terminate the speaker's privilege to address the board. All right, and our first individual on here is Joy Rogers. Okay, great.
And I think I already emailed it to you, so you're more than welcome to point out to everybody.
Yes, I know you did email. I know I've read it. I am certain other board members have too. I heard them talking about it tonight. So we saw what you sent. Yes, you do. And there's a little red button and a little red light should come on when it's on for you to speak.
Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. Do I need to announce where I'm from or anything like that, or?
That is up to you. We know your name is Joy Rogers, and you are welcome to give us any other information.
Okay. So I am Joy Rogers. I am the co-chair of the Board of Directors for the Hayden Senior Center, and I'm here today. We did submit a letter earlier, but I kind of wanted to go over that with you today, and I understand I won't receive a response to my request, but we are looking at the Hayden Lake School. That's what this is in regards to. That had gone up for bid last month, and we were made aware of that. And we had talked with Jeff, who is the one that takes the questions for the bid process. And some of the things that we had asked, he said, well, those are probably something that you need to bring up to the board because we would be looking for an amendment to that request for bid. So first, thank you for having me and hearing me out and listening to me. I have a couple of my board members here with me as well. So this again is on behalf of the Hayden Senior Center. And the board of directors, we've actually looked at the Hayden School for, on and off for several years. You know, there was some uncertainty as far as what was going to happen with it and what was going to be done. And I think that there were some things that needed to be worked out. But we've been looking for a relocation place for quite some time, a piece of property, preferably with a structure. And the school kept coming back to being one of those locations that we felt would work well for us. It would accommodate our growth, and it would also help expand our services. In addition, we had to also look for ways to be able to sustain our operation. And part of that would be bringing more public community service type events at this new location that we're looking for. So for example, I could see that we could be bringing in meeting rooms, for local businesses that needed to have those additional office space, an event location, and other activities, for the public. So again, this has been a property of interest for the past several years. And so when we wanted to bring that to your attention, the bid request, when I saw the proposal in the agenda last month, it prefaced, or I saw in there that there were already a couple developers that were already in talks about it. And so it seemed like the bid request had a pretty short timeline for the highest bid period by April 20th. And as you know, as a nonprofit, it takes a little longer, for us to get our finances in order. We do rely on state and county and city funds. And so as soon as we knew that this space was up for sale and available, we started reaching out again to all of our partners because we felt that this was actually the place that could be a new home for the Hayden Senior Center. So we have been in discussions with the Idaho Department of Commerce regarding grants, the City of Hayden, the Hayden Urban Renewal Agency, and some other financial resources. So for us, we were hoping that we could have, we're requesting an amendment basically to maybe extend that due date 4 to 6 months and have an opportunity to maybe kind of, I know you have in there for the highest bid, but maybe something on the lines of, we know that judicially you have to make sure that you receive what you deserve, for the property, but maybe the use intended as well. We do believe that this property could be a great point for the Hayden area, and our goal would be to maintain that historical feature as it is. Just by cleaning it up inside and, doing some aesthetics that we would need to do internally, but leaving the main building as it is today. So I think pretty much that's what we're asking, is that if you would be able to extend it and amend it to maybe word it a little bit differently to allow others that aren't just maybe looking to tear down the building, but what could really be done for the community of Hayden. And that's part of our focus, our seniors as well as the rest of the public. And I think with that, that's all I had.
All right, well, thank you very much, Joy.
Thank you.
And so I think I have one of your associates also here for public comment, Jason Ball.
Joy did a wonderful job of explaining what we're here for. My name's Jason Ball, and I'm a co-chair also with the nonprofit that we represent. And just a point of clarification, the nonprofit is actually GEM Community Citizens Project Group. We have different entities under that umbrella. The Hayden Senior Center is one, Jumpin' Beans Mobile Food Bank is another, and the Hayden Lake Marathon. So I just wanted to clarify that, you know, we're really looking at a community center for the use of the school, the Hayden Lake School. And you probably don't know this, but the Hayden Lake Marathon splits. It's 100% volunteer organization for everything that can be, you know, the traffic control, we have to hire out professional services for that. But everybody who serves is a volunteer, and 100% of those proceeds are split 50-50 between the Hayden Senior Center and the Coeur d'Alene School Sports Program. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, well, thank you, Jason. All right, that is all I had in terms of public comment today. So that moves us into our next agenda item of the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right. Next, we have consent agenda items that are information only. Do any board members have any comments or anything they wanted to discuss on that consent agenda? Hearing none, I will move on to finance. And we have our finance report.
In person here.
In person.
Yeah. Good evening, Board of Trustees. I'm going to jump into this presentation here. A lot of it is going to summarize some information we already know, so I'm going to go pretty quickly, but just stop me if you have any questions or want me to go over anything. So jump in here. Just a quick overview. We'll go over major budget events for the current fiscal year. We'll talk about some changes for our current fiscal year budget that are in the works in the legislative session, as well as Jfac's FY22 budget that has been approved and is going to the legislature for approval, and a few considerations and reminders, and then a quick overview of our budget subcommittee this spring. So this is a table summarizing our major budget events, changes that we did not expect to have this year due to COVID. And all the slides afterwards kind of go into each of those events. You know, the FY21 budget was set. And then in April, the governor announced a 5% holdback for the education budget due to budget uncertainty from COVID. And so those cuts were backfilled in large part by ESSER 1 federal stimulus money. And then cuts were made to the budget in order to help balance the budget after that 5% holdback. So in September, the state announced that districts would receive coronavirus relief funds. Our district was allocated $3.5 million, and that was to go to new costs, unbudgeted costs, to respond to or mitigate COVID, and a budget for that was approved by the board in December. Now, in February, we received word that more stimulus money was coming our way, $6 million in ESSER 2 funds. That's a preliminary allocation. We don't have our final allocation yet, but we're working with that $6 million there. And along with that announcement came an announcement from Governor Little that the current year budget would change yet again, reducing our discretionary allocation, and that's going to cost the budget about $2.5 million. overall. So ESSER2 money will backfill that as well to keep us whole. So,
Hey, Katie,
yeah.
can I just ask a question on the ESSER1 fund, or excuse me, the coronavirus relief funds, the 3.5 million? It was a question I heard a lot around levy time, and people were talking about, you got this extra federal money, why didn't you reduce the levy and use that money to help offset the levy? And
Yeah.
could you briefly mention that? Could you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah,
why
and
we
you know,
couldn't?
I heard that quite a bit going into the levy, that there were concerns that we weren't, maybe we were getting federal money, that we could have kind of supplanted levy money and asked for less from our taxpayers. And in the end, there is a summary of how the district needed to use those federal stimulus dollars to date. There's a summary that we posted on the website, cdaschools.org, under departments, finance, and it's, I think, the first report there. So anybody that's concerned about how the district has been handling these funds, that report's a good place to start. But in the end, with cuts from the governor, drops in enrollment, and new costs that masks, HVAC filters are pretty expensive, just all sorts of personnel costs to get people more hours to deal with contact tracing, that sort of thing. That money was spent on new costs to mitigate or respond to COVID. So does that help?
Yeah, I just want to clarify too, that 3.5 million though couldn't be spent on anything that was previously budgeted. Is that correct?
Right. So the coronavirus relief funds, the regulations for those funds were pretty strict. It needed to be new, unbudgeted costs specific to COVID. So it couldn't supplant any other costs in our budget or reduce our need for any levy money.
So anything that was in our budget approved in June of 2020, we couldn't use those funds towards those budgeted items, correct?
Right.
And if we didn't spend the money, which it had a deadline at the time, I know that ended up getting extended, but if we hadn't spent the money, what would have happened to it?
We would have sent it back. So in the end, it was a huge relief to our budget that these funds were allocated to us, because we did have additional costs, probably beyond 3.5 million when we finish out all the reports. So that would have been a hit to our fund balance, which would have caused significant cash flow issues.
Katie, I had a quick question. On the second, the ESSER2, so we have not received those funds yet, correct?
Right. So we're working off of an allocation. The state issued a report of how it looks like districts will receive the allocations. It's not yet been approved. We don't know which fiscal year we're going to receive the funds. However, they do, I believe, ESSER2 is, I just looked this up and I can't believe I'm spacing on it, is at least 2 years. And then ESSER3, which we'll talk about, is 3 years performance period. So we have time to kind of figure out what's the best way to use these funds in order to respond to COVID.
And are there less restrictions on the ESSER2 funds, or do you anticipate there'll be similar restrictions as the first round of stimulus funds?
Yeah, so ESSER funds typically are, they have fewer restrictions. And so like we saw with these first bullet points, we used our first ESSER allocation just to backfill budget cuts. So the coronavirus relief funds we were not allowed to backfill budget cuts. And so with ESSER2 and ESSER3, ESSER2, we're generally seeing that it's mostly discretionary. I think anything that a school district does, you can use these funds for. However, we're also seeing budget cuts coming from the state. There's a lot of uncertainty as far as ongoing costs we're going to have to take on. So that's part of probably our budget subcommittee discussion, which will bring all of that back to the Board of Trustees. But ESSER3, it sounds like there's going to be a little bit more regulation to follow with ESSER3. 20% needs to go to what they've called learning loss, like evidence-based ways to address learning loss in districts. And then beyond that, they're also calling out a number of infrastructure types of costs that will probably be those strings attached to that money. And that's we're estimating that allocation to be up to $12 million, but we really don't even have a report from the state where, they've given us for ESSER 2. They're just kind of saying, oh, multiply this number by 2 and that might be it. So I don't want to take that kind of conversation to the bank right now. So
Yeah, I guess I would request maybe Dr. Cook, you could assist with this. As we move forward with these ESSER 2 funds, we've had some community ask, are these funds actually ending up with our students? Are we actually using them to remediate learning loss or for programs for learning recovery, I guess I should say. So moving forward, a conversation I'm sure is to be had, as you mentioned, about how can we best utilize these funds for our students. We use some of the ESSER initial funds for budget issues and loss of enrollment, et cetera, but these funds would be nice if we could prioritize that they end up assisting our students with learning recovery and just beginning that conversation, especially as summer school gets near and what programs might be available for our students sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that's exactly the conversation that we're having right now. I think it's a little bit of a challenge because we haven't been given specifics as of yet, and we're not exactly sure what those allocation dollars would look like. We have been hearing pretty consistently now that 20% of that should be earmarked for what we're calling learning recovery, and that over a period of time. And so I would caution us to think of just simply summer school. I think one of the things we're hearing fairly consistently is our people are pretty tired, but we do want to make sure that we're giving our students that opportunity to go back and take advantage of opportunities that maybe didn't exist to the extent that they would have wanted them to, or to families to provide those services. How that will look will continue to be discussed and developed, and hopefully we can have a pretty comprehensive package that would provide those opportunities starting as soon as this summer and continuing into the school year and beyond, and quite arguably for the next several years as we try to work our way back from this rather challenging year.
Yeah, it's a unique opportunity to assist our students, so I'm looking forward to hearing that conversation. Katie, my last question is the $2.5 million, it says Governor Little budget revision plus loss of enrollment. Didn't we initially believe that we would not be held harmless for loss of enrollment for this year? Has that changed?
Well, in large part, we were held harmless. However, so basically what the state did was they changed from average daily attendance to enrollment. That's how the formula is calculating our support units. However, when you lose 8% of enrollment, even if you're getting every, student on your roster, you're getting funded for every student on your roster, there's still a gap between, what we would have lost, for average, or what we gain back by getting to count students, even if they were absent. So it's still yet to be seen, because with all the changes that Governor Little is proposing, the state has not issued any reports that are useful for us at this point. So we're still waiting for the legislature to approve his current year changes, and then we can get some better data from the state on how our funding is going to shake out. So I don't want to commit too much to what the change is between budget and what we're going to receive. But if you just take the drop in funding for the support unit that Governor Little has proposed, that calculates out to about $2.5 million decrease in funding. So, which there is an increase in funding on salary-based apportionment, but we're not seeing that it's going to be enough to net against that.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, so current year, just kind of overview. Our budget is in a state of uncertainty, and the legislature still needs to approve Governor Little's latest changes. That's kind of what I was just going through. And most districts in Idaho are planning, that's going to go through. We're not feeling that there's going to be any change from what's been presented. So we're planning accordingly as far as those current year changes. And then, of course, we talked about the ESSER 3 funds. An additional up to 12 million is what we're hearing could be the number. And as discussed, stricter guidelines, and we'll be digging into that. Okay, so let's talk about FY22. I'm going to go through our the Jfac budget. Usually when Jfac agrees on a budget, we feel that it's probably going to move forward. So that's why we like to dig into what they put out there. And giving that background of all the changes for the current year, it became very clear that we needed to, we shouldn't compare Jfac's FY22 budget to current year. We really ought to be comparing it to FY20. FY20 was a normal year. There was a holdback in the end, so we're comparing to the pre-holdback, the 1% holdback. But we want to compare to a place where we kind of, we were funded normally that year. So if you compare FY22 or Jfac's FY22 numbers to Governor Little's latest proposal, you're going to see, our discretionary unit did increase a lot, but you're not really comparing to what the impact to the budget is going to be. So we're going to go through all these comparing to FY20. So you see that the discretionary unit is up, so that's good news. And salary-based apportionment, it will reflect movement on the career ladder. That's what the Jfac budget shows, as well as a 2% increase on administrative and classified matrices. So that would be on top of what the current year movement that is hopefully going to get approved as well. So that would effectively catch up staff's placement on the state salary schedule. And so I'm very careful to say staff placement on the state salary formula, because this doesn't mean that our district would then in turn have enough money to pay for steps and lanes, as well as a 2% increase on administrative and classified. So, staff might see a headline out there that says those increases are coming through. Unfortunately, it's often not enough funding, not even close to enough to fund those items in our budget. So I always put that reminder in there. You guys cannot see that. It doesn't really matter, because this is just to show kind of the method that we used. I took the Jfac's appropriations budget and I put up all of the iterations of FY21 as well as FY20, the kind of our base year. In that comparison line, the percent change is FY22 Jfac budget compared to FY20 base year. And then I also subtracted out growth. That's important because they always add more support units to the formula. So you want to make sure you get that out of there before you really look at the overall impact to the budget, which is a 4% increase. So that's great news. That does not mean that the district we can just take how much revenue we have and add 4%. That's not exactly how it works, but it is good to see a budget that is higher. And we also have to keep in mind that going from FY20, the year we're comparing to, there would be 2 years of movement on the career ladder. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Katie, do you know, currently, I think Powerball's scheduled to go away in the end of June or July. Do you know what the impact would be on our budget if
we currently receive, I want to say, about $700,000 for lottery funds. And so, of course, there's speculation on what the change is going to be, but there's not really been a lot of, answers that I can say I'm going to cut by this much. But we probably, as we get into the budget subcommittees, we'll talk about what's a reasonable amount to cut that line item.
Yeah. So the numbers that were on that slide there, that's the state total. Is that correct?
That is, let me see where lottery is on there.
It says 21 million or something to that effect, 22 million.
Yeah, so they did cut it a bit, but that's not, compared to current year.
I thought I saw somewhere it was like 14 million of the total came from Powerball, so
yeah,
it was a potential cut of 14 million to schools.
Yeah, and
thought
that, I mean, to some extent too, you have to wonder if people choose not to buy a Powerball if they're going to just not play the lottery anymore. So there's that discussion there too. So, but yeah, I think that is a bigger discussion to have, just where we'll land on that revenue. So I've got a pie chart here. You know, we looked at that appropriations budget, lots of line items, lots of changes in, you know, the overall percent. But the ones that earn us the most, or the, you know, line items that earn us the most are based on our salary placement for our employees. And so we talk about salary-based apportionment. The overall increase to salary-based apportionment is just under 6%, so that's really good news, and we expect that because that's 2 years of movement going from FY20 to FY22. So does this mean that we can just take our salary-based apportionment numbers right now and increase by, or, you know, from FY20 and increase by 6%? No, it's based on the staff we have on hand, as well as our support units. And our support units will be a tough conversation during our budget subcommittees, where we want to, you know, plug that number in. That affects a lot on our revenues. So just a couple of considerations and reminders. I think I may have said this at least 10 times during this presentation. A percentage increase on the revenue formula does not equate to the cost of a percentage salary increase. So just because they say 2% for administrators and classified or movement on the career ladder does not mean it's going to generate enough money for us to be able to afford that. So, you know, that's part of the overall budget process on how we, you know, see what we can afford. And just kind of to illustrate that, for FY20 in the general fund, we paid 45% more in salaries than the state salary allocation. So we pay more than what is allocated, and so that's why that formula doesn't calculate out that way. And the House and the Senate need to approve Jfac's budget for current year and for FY22, and the governor needs to sign them into law before this is set. So this is, we're looking at something that's not yet been approved, but usually this is what goes through. And the Idaho legislature is ending their recess and they are back at it tomorrow. So hopefully we get news that this is approved shortly. Our budget subcommittee meetings are scheduled. At this point, Trustee Morrisroe and Trustee Smith are on that committee and that subcommittee, and our opening meeting April 28th. Then we give a little gap because we're not sure how quickly the state will come out with their spreadsheets. So May 12th is the revenue meeting, and then the following week is the expenditure meeting. And I'll open it up for any more questions.
All right, you've clarified things so well, nobody has any questions other than what was already asked. Thank you, Katie. Thanks for being here tonight. All right, next is our policies for action. These were all a part of our board packet last week. And if memory serves, yeah, we had no public comments at all. And therefore, as I reviewed, no revisions to any of the policies that we saw from last month. So do I have a motion to approve the policies for action?
So moved.
Second.
Do we have any discussion on any of those policies? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Superintendent's reports. Review of category status. Dr. Cook.
Thank you, Chair Brumley. As you know, there's been a fairly substantial drop in the amount of cases that have been in our community, both in our community and in our schools most recently. And so it was proposed that we have a discussion to consider policy 1207 on whether or not we would be continuing the masking policy that we currently have in place as a part of our COVID resolution plan that we put into place back in July or August. There's we've taken a substantial amount of time to analyze the data, and we'd like to kind of have a conversation with you all tonight about what that data would be suggesting and as a path going forward and what our recommendations would be. So if I could, I'd like to introduce Nicole Piekarski, and she's going to share some information and some data with you, both information that we've developed on our own accord, and then some information that Panhandle Health District has also supplied for us, and then maybe consider 4 possible scenarios briefly before we would make any kind of recommendation from us as to a path forward. So at this time, I'd like to turn over to Nicole.
Good evening, Chair Brumley, members of the board, Superintendent Cook. Thank you for having me this evening. We see on the board the information that was shared last week as the revised. As you know, we had the break with spring break, so we were preparing some information to review, and this is the information that went to the public at the end of last week, I believe. And just as of today, I included a note for you about updated numbers. So I do have those in front of me, although we know that at 5 p.m. today, the health department probably posted some new local numbers that I have not had the chance to review. On our dashboard, if you had reviewed that or have looked at that this afternoon, you would see that we do not yet have a Kootenai County specific number for 7-day rolling average for April 4th. That is because that number is usually posted on Tuesdays, and so we will have that tomorrow for you. But what I want to share with you overall is that basically we've been looking at a very similar set of numbers every day for a few weeks here. We have consistently had Kootenai County numbers of 6 to 7 cases per 100,000 for a few weeks. Our percent positivity, interestingly, has gone down. However, we've discussed before that that number coming from the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare is delayed. So if we were to consider a category status change, we would be looking at 3 categories or 3 data points. And so we see that the information we have from Idaho Department of Health and Welfare on percent positivity is improved, that it is lower than 5% for the numbers we have, but it is 2 weeks out. We know that the hospital has been operating at less than 90% capacity for a number of weeks, and so this is hopeful information for us. But our rolling 7-day average number of cases per 100,000 has not gone down to the prior baseline. So what we're looking at in case numbers is that we have come down significantly, and since January we did have several periods of rapid drop, but we have kind of met a number where we're staying for a few weeks. We have discussed this number, and given that spring break has just occurred and folks are coming back, we are very interested in what all 3 of these data points will be in the next 2 weeks. So we're really wondering if we'll see a number change because of a number of, the Easter holiday, family time, travel, and the impact of all of that in our numbers. I've included some vaccine information there for you. We know that 37% of our Coeur d'Alene Schools staff have submitted their records for complete immunization, so that's on a self-reported system. And we see that that number is just a little bit higher than Kootenai County overall and the Panhandle as well. And then we go into our comments and what we see as 4 possible pathways if the board so chooses to address masking, to move away from a requirement of masking for all individuals and to move toward a recommended masking policy.
So we've spent a lot of time discussing this, and let me lead off by stating, first of all, that the CDC still recommends that in their new guidance that the 3 foot, the transition from 6 feet to 3 feet is incumbent upon both parties wearing masks in a classroom. Secondly, the threshold for incidence rate with the CDC is less than 1 per 100,000. And then lastly, that hospitalization should also be in the 75% range to 90% range or lower for them to move in effectively what the CDC would consider green. So kind of caveat our discussion with that as the first set of criteria. And currently, that's the guidance that Panhandle Health District also would support, is that is their recommendation. One of the things that we've considered is what I would ask you to look at up on the board is section or the second option, which is adopting to some extent a stage strategy that kind of steps down our required recommendation in the policy to a strongly recommended recommendation. Was a lot of recommendations there. Going from required to recommended in that policy over time. And that's predicated, number one, on the data continuing to plateau or even continuing to decrease. First of all, we would set a timeline in which we would hold status currently and give 2 weeks of that time to pass post spring break, so that essentially, like, for example, April 19th, we would say, okay, we haven't seen a dramatic increase in the number of cases. The percent positivity has been holding fairly steadily, and the hospitalizations are still relatively low, that we would start to recommend that there are places and times in which those mask usage could be reduced. We started with pre-K to K2. As those are the areas in which we see the absolute lowest incident rate in exchange in our schools. And then the following week, we would move to 3-5, and the following week 6-8, and the following week 9-12. And if you look at that first stage, that would be the usage of masks outdoors. And then in the second stage, you would see that we would change those to the usage of masks indoors. And so you essentially just week by week would be kind of transitioning down, with the caveat also that if there was ever a point at which we had a cluster in a building, that we would go back to a required masking mandate rather than a recommended masking in any school in which a cluster outbreak might occur. And so this is one possible option that we could consider for the district. If we scroll down just a little bit, the other option that we have considered is number 3, is that we went back to our original data of way back when the district was running our own metrics, and we suggested what if we pulled that data back up, and once we were below a 5%, incident rate of 5 per 100,000 for an extended period of time, 2 weeks, and a percent positivity below 5% for 2 weeks, which at this point, I don't believe we've been below 5 on percent positivity for a little while, but we didn't stay there. But I don't think we've had an extended time under an incident rate of 5 or below, actually for quite a few months now. But if we were to get below those thresholds, and including low incident rate in the hospitalizations, that once we had 2 extended weeks under that for all 3 of those, that we would then say we could move from required to recommended across the board for all locations and all levels. And last but not least, one of the things after lots and lots of discussion, and there's one piece I want to really make sure we're following up on, is perhaps it's time to consider hybridizing those 2 options, and maybe we do a step-down model with kind of a safety net, that if we ever did get 2 weeks of below that data set of the 5 and 5 for 2 weeks extended, then perhaps we could remove the required mandate and go to a recommended mandate. And the one factor I think that is a very serious consideration that the board needs to have at least some discussion, or make sure that the awareness is clear, is that the ability to protect students from being quarantined is a real discussion, because if right now we're functioning under a guidance from the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare that if we have a mask-to-mask exposure in a classroom, then and the exposure was with good quality mask wearing, then the person who is exposed but was wearing a mask doesn't have to quarantine. If either one of the two were not wearing a mask, then the ability for that quarantining not to happen goes away. And so when you think about how we were experiencing some of the issues in our high schools earlier in the year, if people who are going to continue to want to mask because of their personal preference, they feel like it's the right thing that they would choose to do, but they're exposed by somebody that wasn't wearing a mask, that does not give them the authority to stay in class. Though they would be subject to the quarantining rules that are currently in place as expected by the state and by our health district. And so there's a fairly serious conversation to have there. Students, staff could be following the rules quite explicitly the way we would ask them to, wearing a mask every single day, and could potentially be quarantined even while wearing those masks. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about was how that timeline would match up with some of the major events. You would think about high schools, right? There's prom coming, there are finals coming, there are AP exams, there's graduation. So many of those things could now be could be potentially issues for some of our older students that could create some difficulties when it comes to non-masking. If we give people the authority to choose not to wear a mask, mostly at our secondary levels. So I think that's kind of where we would like to propose that part of the discussion. If you notice, if you go back to that stage down kind of model, you'll see that there's a path forward with some exceptions for if a school would happen to have some issues, we would go back to or recommend school by school that they're required masking, and would be actually instilled back in that school if we were to adopt a guideline like this. And I do anticipate that there are going to be some people that are highly attuned to this and quite frankly are ready for this to be over. So I do think if we do move from required to recommended, and then we do have a flare up in a school, it's going to be pretty challenging for families to have to go back to a required masking for some of our folks. And we've had lots of comments, tremendous amount of comments to stay the course until the end of the year. And we've also had some comments that Panhandle Health District has dropped their mask mandate. Why are we still masking? So we recognize that there's a very, very mixed data set out there for what people want us to move forward with.
That's it.
I think that's it. What I would tell you formally, our recommendation is we feel confident that this kind of stage down model seems to be a very reasonable path forward. Our goal is not to have our kids in masks for the rest of their schooling and never being without masks again. And so the kind of weekly next stage model seems to be an appropriate path forward. It does hold our high school kids to a pretty strict masking process for almost the entire year, just because of those risks on those quarantining. However, I would also recommend that we adopt that third option, which is that at any point, once we get below that threshold of 5, an incident rate of 5 per 100,000 and extended for 2 weeks or more, and 5% positive, less than 5% positivity for extended for 2 weeks or more, that we could go from required masking to recommended masking across the board, because we believe the incident rate would be low enough that the effects of quarantining would be quite small at that point. I think that's it. Say everything right?
Yeah, I think I would just add the reinforcement of there is a growing body of research that is confirming that elementary children are a lower risk. And so if I was to tell you I really want to stand behind something, I'm confident that I would feel much more comfortable if we were to address elementary children moving to recommended masks prior to grades 9 through 12.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I would open it up to comments from the board or questions from trustees?
Dr. Cook, I had a quick question just about the number 3 option. So we would do away with the metrics that, we had issues at the beginning of the year creating our own metrics. I know you guys worked long and hard on it, but it was difficult. And so we had confusion between using panhandles, recommended metrics. So are you now suggesting we do away with following panhandle and adopt our own again? Because I fear that there will be confusion in our community once again, that we're changing the rule book. And I think we've received some criticism for doing that in the past. And I'm really hesitant, even though I just think it's worrisome and frustrating for our families that have been trying to follow this on either side, that we're changing the rules again. And are we trying to change them to suit our own needs? Is there a reason why we would not follow Panhandle's recommendation or the CDC's and adopt different metrics? Is there a compelling reason?
That's a fair question. I think that there's 2 things at play here. The first one is that the Panhandle Health District would recommend an incident rate of less than 1. And what we've seen before, they would consider that as a green, if you will. And I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that Panhandle Health District has released the mask mandate across the entire county. And so that in itself is a little bit of a challenging position to kind of align with. I'm not sure if that means they're supporting the CDC recommendations or they're not supporting the CDC recommendations. The second piece, I think, is that we've seen a much lower incident rate in our schools than we have in the community for quite some time now. And so I do think, yes, the absolute, what we would be asking it for you to adopt if in option 3 would be to change those metrics once again for the lowest threshold of green. With building in a time kind of buffer of those 2 weeks at those levels. So yes, I do suppose that is quite possibly confusing for our community, but I also do want to recognize that we have been floating much lower than the incident rate at the county level for quite some time in our schools. And I do believe that we've had a pretty good success with our mitigation strategies. I do think there is some risk when we do allow folks to unmask and for those that are choosing to unmask, but we've also seen a much lower rate. And I think providing the opportunity for those that wish to wear masks still is a valuable resource. And if we do see in that model, if we do see that there are clusters happening in schools, we can go back to masking once again. And so you're absolutely right, Trustee May. I do agree with you that we could be potentially confusing the issues again by changing those metrics.
And so just to be clear, so then we would be moving back to the prior model that you presented to the board in September. So then we'd also be using that model for our operating status because ours were different, significantly different than Panhandle's, and ours were actually more strict as far as operating status. And so that's what worries me, is that we have inconsistencies. We're going to use our metrics for masking, but we won't be using them for operating status. And I'm a little bit...
Can you be more clear with operating status specifically?
Yeah, our metrics were different than Panhandle's as far as yellow, orange, green. We had Correct. 4 categories. It was very different. And so would it just pertain to mass, or would it pertain then, because I guess I would need to see the entire document, because it was very different in the incidence and the positivity as far as how we operated, whether it was hybrid, whether Nicole, maybe you can help me out. But so we just saying we're only going to pick this part for masking, and for operations we're going to stick with Panhandle's yellow, orange, red status, because they're kind of one and the same. Does that make? Am I being clear?
Could I would like to share that we had similar conversations at the district office, and we did work with Lynn to go back and check the board minutes as to what metrics were approved when and what the criteria were. We did have those discussions in the district about what values would define our matrix for those color categories. However, the health department then developed categories that we approved, and Lynn was able to confirm that for us, that the school board approved the following of those data points, or those defining criteria for colors. And I think, I don't want to speak for Steve, but I think we really are talking about the policy 1207 defining when masks are recommended versus worn. In the green yellow, orange, red categories, as opposed to going to redefining what those colors are. We're talking about defining when masks are associated with those colors.
So just applying it towards masks.
I apologize. Now I understand the question. That makes a lot more sense. We are not backing off of any of the strategies yet. If we believe that the pandemic were over at whenever that point would happen, then our recommendation would be to rescind the resolution that the board passed that essentially adopts the entire COVID response plan. We're not at that point at this point. What we're doing now is talking about how we would change policy 1207 to go from procedurally requiring masks to procedurally strongly recommending masks, and specifically just that.
I'm going to give my comments. I'm going to keep them fairly brief because I'm guessing we have some people watching this and they probably want to watch a basketball game in about 15 minutes. So I think for me, I'm not totally opposed to the step-down model. I'm just, perhaps the timeline seems really stretched out for me. Particularly outdoors, I think, at least to me, you can make a case that with the current positivity rates that masks aren't required outdoors at this point, with the panhandle mask no longer in effect. And of course, we've been operating that way in our extracurriculars all school year. And, I think things that have changed for me over the school year is, we've seen some pretty good success there. We haven't seen, I think, what many of us were afraid of or cautious of, at least on that sports committee, that, okay, we're going to try this, but I'm not sure in September we thought it was going to work and that we would get through full seasons and have teams get through full seasons. And of course, we had some teams miss little parts of seasons, but far less than I would anticipate, especially with football, basketball, wrestling. We just didn't see those big cluster outbreaks. Excuse me. When it comes to recommending versus requiring, for me, at least when I'm in public, I think wearing a mask is the right thing to do. I've been vaccinated, but I don't know if you have, and so I'm trying to protect those that I don't know about. But I see that as a personal choice, particularly at these levels. And when I look at whether it's the governor's recommendations, the State Department of Ed, CDC's, they recommend that you wear a mask. They don't recommend that you require a mask, or they don't say you should require a mask. And at these levels, I think I agree that I would strongly recommend that we require masks, or that we strongly recommend that masks are worn. But at this point, I'd be okay not requiring masks. I do have a concern on the quarantines. And kind of that you're somewhat penalized if you choose to wear a mask and the other person doesn't. I'd love some more information about looking at that. I know it'd be kind of creating our own policy again, and maybe it's some discussion. But if you choose to wear a mask, I'd love to see you not get quarantined if someone else chooses to not wear a mask and they end up sick, assuming you're symptom-free. Maybe that's just too big of a stretch, but that's where I would be. I understand concerns around travel, and just in that regard, when we look at CDC recommendations, another recommendation was that you not travel. And I traveled over spring break. There were 40 Coeur d'Alene people on my plane, and I saw dozens and dozens of other people that traveled over spring break that are students of ours, so I understand the concern. But again, that was a recommendation many folks chose not to follow. So that's where I'm at. I would support moving to a recommendation.
Right away, or the April 19th date that they're asking for to take into consideration everyone that was traveling?
Personally, I'd be comfortable right away, but I understand the reluctance and could go along with that.
I'll do my comments because I know we all are interested in watching some basketball. I want to thank Nicole and her team again for compiling this data. It's been really helpful for us. And to all the community members that reached out, and to students over there. We got some great emails from them. And one student, it was really well written, and it was heartfelt, and she was 17, and she just became eligible to receive a vaccine, and she hasn't had the opportunity to receive it yet. And I think that's a population of our students that we need to consider tonight. We have many 16, 17, 18-year-olds who are very lucky if they choose to receive a vaccine, which they may not, which is absolutely their choice. But if they want one, they haven't had the opportunity because of spring break to yet receive this vaccine. And so I think allowing time for them to get a vaccine is only fair. Secondly, there's also some freshmen and sophomores who aren't eligible for vaccines, but we know that they're more susceptible to catching and spreading COVID. And we know that their symptoms are oftentimes more severe than what we're seeing into K-5. So I do agree with Nicole. The data is in that our K-5 students are handling COVID-19 better. But lastly, I think there's a lot to celebrate tonight, and I would like to look forward to spring, and I always think back to what spring means for our schools, and it's a momentous time. It's probably the most special time of the year for all of our students, K-12, kindergarten graduation, high school graduation, award ceremonies, prom, awards banquets, class get-togethers, and our students have lost so much in the last year. And being on the sidelines because of a quarantine, because the person sitting next to you is not wearing a mask, is no longer fair. And we're asking a small amount to continue this year masked at least 2 weeks till we see how spring break settles out. We know in the past, and Nicole, I would like you to speak to this, after every holiday, starting with Labor Day, we have seen a spike in cases in our community and in our schools. And Casey's absolutely right. Many of us traveled for spring break. I would like to say the CDC says you can travel if you've been vaccinated. But we will see some sort of spike. It's just inevitable. And so protecting our students so nobody is sitting on the sidelines this spring. Every student that has the opportunity to get caught up, to graduate, to walk across that stage, to go to prom, to sit at the awards banquet with their parents, I want that for our students. And I'm not sure I can be responsible for preventing that from happening. And so unless we have a plan in place to do away with quarantine, which I'm not sure I'm comfortable doing either, because then we're really going beyond what the CDC is recommending. I'm pleading for our students, please let's not take anything else away from them. They have lost so much, and wearing a mask might be the last thing that they have to do, and it's not going to be forever. It might be 2 weeks, it might be a month, but especially for our high school students, let's allow them everything that they've earned this spring.
So I counted, and it's 48 days of in-school instruction still between now. Maybe it's 49, but I'm pretty sure it's 48. So we've got 48 days to land this plane, the whole school year plane. And I get it. I get the personal choice. I get those that don't want masks right now. I get the letters that came in dramatically saying, can we just ride this plane to the end and get there? And so I get that. And yet I want to prioritize that in-person school attendance right now, especially for our high schoolers. I want them to get there. I get the sacrifice, the peer pressure that goes with that, all those things. And I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the people that have worn masks all year. I'm thankful for those that have said this isn't right, all those things. And for me right now, can we just get to the end? I do wonder about the outdoor piece, especially for our elementary kids. Is there a way around that outdoor when they're at recess? Does that make sense at this point, given where we're at with our numbers? And so that would be the piece I'd want to maybe come back to is really look at that. And maybe that's where that, especially as things get hot and it's hot outside, well, play outside. Maybe there's a piece in there that makes good number sense. But for me right now, with given the CDC and all the other things, I'm struggling to do a full step down.
I'm more along the lines of what Casey was recommending, but taking into account the vacations that have taken place and maybe pushing back our time for recommended only. and also looking at the how we quarantine, because I too don't think it would be right for someone who's masking to quarantine because someone who didn't. I'm not sure how we look at that and what that looks like. And I don't know exactly how the other school districts around us, but I believe they're all at recommended only. And I can't speak for what they do, but from what I've heard, I don't believe they quarantine, except for the person that's positive. So that's like a tricky thing, is the quarantine, how that would work with the recommended. So not sure that my thoughts help, but
Well, of course they
on
do.
to you, Jen.
I am more in line with where Casey and Tambra are in moving to remove the required mask mandate. I do also want to see a little bit of the numbers over the next 2 weeks. So I would be leaning towards making a mask recommendation as of April 19th. But we have a board meeting on the 19th, and so we could ask that the administration bring us their thoughts on a quarantine policy, in similar to what Mr. Morris Rowe was just talking about, what Casey was talking about, and seeing if that's something that we wanted to consider. I have looked at the graded, and I've been open to the more graded process, but I also am very aware of our neighboring districts and how they have been handling this and managing this. I'm aware that there's a large contingency of this community that wants to move to recommended. It doesn't mean kids can't wear them. It just means they're not required to. So that's where I'm sitting.
So maybe looking at it again on April 19th to see what the numbers look like in our schools. Is that what you're saying? Like once we have a couple weeks of kids coming back and taking a look at what, how many positives we have, because we've been extremely low. I don't even know how many we have right now in the district. I haven't looked prior here, but 3 total in our whole district. And yes, we've been on spring break, so that could look different here in the next few days. So looking at having this discussion again on the 19th, or?
Well, I see it as 2 options. That's one. We could move the entire decision, or there could be a motion brought that on the 19th we would go to mask recommended only, and we would review a quarantine policy on the 19th.
Okay.
I have a question though before motion's brought for Nicole. Do you know how many elementary student positives we had the week before spring break?
I believe that number was 1.
Do we know how many secondary students we had that week?
None. Well, let me rephrase that. Middle school, none. Our middle school numbers have been very low for quite a while. We had 4 positives in 9 through 12.
Okay. And then how about staff? Did we have positive staff at the elementary or high school?
Those numbers are actually combined of students and staff.
Okay.
Oh, total.
So 5 total cases of 11,500 people? Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you, Nicole.
I think that, yes, something like that.
All right.
So just kind of 2 other things I'd like to say. One, some of the comments we received were about, hey, you're changing the rules again, and if I knew you weren't going to require a mask, I never would have sent my kid to school, and those sorts of things. And I understand that, and that's certainly within someone's rights. I would just like to point out that the original operating plan that we approved, green, we are on the verge of being in our original green, which did not require a mask, or I believe really any of the COVID preventative stuff, at least any of the major type things that we do at elementary, and some of those things which we've softened anyways. But we are on the verge of that, and certainly if things kept in the same trend, we would be moving to no mask under the original plan. And so I don't think we ever said we were going to require masks for the full year. And in fact, it was in our plan that under certain thresholds, masks would go away. The other thing I'd just like to point out, and I think Ms. Pickford or Ms. Brumley mentioned it, but we have other districts around us that appear to have similar results to us. I know that's hard to tell because I know they don't track like we do, they don't quarantine like we do, they don't report like we do. And that's, kind of a fantastic job from Nicole and her team that they've done to really keep us on top of that data. And I don't think they have that data. But they appear to be making it work. And they're in our communities and, they appear to mimic what's happening in the county and in their neighborhood or their community. And I would guess some of that's because kids aren't masking outside of school. And that's why our numbers have probably followed, for the most part, what's going on in the county. Because we know sports and extracurriculars and hanging out on the weekends and drive by a park and all those sorts of things, the majority of school-aged kids are not masking outside of school.
I would like to request that we don't make a motion tonight until we have data from 2 weeks. It would be ill-advised to change policy until we see what the data actually shows. If we're meeting, why don't we have a review of our data? 2 weeks will give us time to see trends, and we can make a motion and vote with current accurate data. Nicole's expressed that we don't have data from last week. Our data is lagging from the state. And so I think it's in everyone's best interest to at least review data before we make a motion to amend policy that affects 10,000 students and 1,000 staff. And furthermore, I'd just like to add about case counting. Nicole's kept her own records, but the state of Idaho does keep their own records. And Coeur d'Alene High School and Lake City High School are leading the state for cases in our state.
Those are self-reported based on what we report.
Those numbers are confirmed weekly with laboratory values at the state level.
That's not what it says on the state's website anymore. It says that they just use data from the districts, that they could not get that information from the health districts anymore. At least that's what I saw.
It does say that from the state that they're using a combination of tactics to get that information, including the last time I reviewed, it said that they were reviewing district websites to receive that information. I actually was not able to get a clear answer from the health department as to where they exactly got that information. But I will tell you that we, in good relationship with the health department here, do collaborate, and they share with us occasionally, by occasionally I mean on a regular basis, those individuals who are related to our school district community who are positive. And so we are confident that we're working with legitimate numbers.
Thank you.
Chair Brumley, I just want to clarify a couple of things. It sounds to me like the consensus would be for us to bring a policy back to the board for consideration that would describe, to some extent, a new or revised quarantining practice that would be based upon whether or not students were masked when that exposure happened. I just want to make sure I understand, are we talking about K through 12? First of all, are we disaggregating between elementary and secondary? Are we talking about K through 12, number one? And number two, are there circumstances in which we should incorporate into that policy how we would handle clusters if they were to happen in a school, if we were to start to get some prevalence of cases in a school, and how this would align to what our current practice exists, just so that I'm clear on what we're doing to augment the plan. So
I think Mr. Marshall wanted to comment.
Since I think brought up that idea, I think it would be appropriate, at least to me, or seem appropriate to treat pre-K through 5 perhaps differently than 6 through 12. I think the issues are more likely at 6 through 12, right? The quarantining is probably a bigger concern there for me. But I understand they're different, right? The elementary kids are somewhat cohorted, although that's changing as we've loosened our practices kind of weekly at the elementary level. But yeah, I'd like to see that, and I would like to see some information. I think it's perfectly appropriate that if we see clusters or outbreaks, whether that's in a classroom or at a school, that we could go back to a masking requirement at that school, even if the county data didn't support that or our community data didn't support that. So maybe some guidelines from you guys, what that would look like and what would be those trigger points, I think would be appropriate.
Could we get some, I'd love to have that either formalized in some fashion or another. I think that's at least some idea of what to expect.
Are you asking for a motion?
Something, just so I know, like, what are all the criteria we'd want, that we want to have included in that, or at least consensus, something?
I can probably make a motion out of that. I'd make a motion that we consider moving to a mask recommendation on the 19th after reviewing new data. And I'd ask that administration draft recommendations around a revised quarantine procedure. And help me, what was the second part there? Kind of identifying when masks would come back as a requirement around clusters or outbreaks within a building or classroom.
And separated by grade level, elementary and secondary?
Yes. That was my motion.
Okay. And second, further discussion?
I guess I'd just like to clarify on your motion, what data or what source would you like them to use to make this recommendation? Because clearly we're no longer using Panhandle's recommendation or the CDC guidelines. So I just want to make sure we're clear on who we're going to be referencing to make these recommendations. Is it going to be our own public health department, or I'm just curious so we could be clear on where they'll be coming from.
On the masking itself?
On the masking, on the criteria, because what the administration has presented is a very clear plan, which I think is reasonable, and so we're choosing not to adopt this, and we're now asking them to go recreate something. They've based this on science, based on Panhandle's recommendation, the memo that we received from Panhandle, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank them for their recommendation, and from the CDC. So what guidance would you like them to follow in creating and drafting these recommendations? Because the recommendations are clear, Panhandle's clear, CDC's clear, and we're not following those, and so I think we're putting them in a difficult position. So I just wanted to clarify where we'd like them to ascertain the best practices.
To me, the recommendations are clear that those institutions recommend you wear a mask, and I would agree with that. I
These
think we should recommend
institutions don't have the
you wear a
ability
mask.
to make policy, Trustee Morrisroe, you know that. They have the ability to recommend guidelines. They don't have the ability to drive policy. Only our board does. So our board can choose whomever we want to follow for these recommendations, but the CDC nor Panhandle does not have the opportunity or the ability to drive district policy. We know that. That's our responsibility.
The state government does.
And the state is recommending masking.
I agree. I think we should recommend masking.
I think what I would say in terms, I don't think there is a place to go for guidance on this quarantine policy. I think this is going to be a matter of discussion, and it may be that there's discussion with Mr. Morrisroe, there's discussion with individual board members to get a sense of what they might be comfortable with, because as we have in the past, this is uncharted territory, and so once again, we're going to look at uncharted territory as I see it.
I don't know that I'd be comfortable with having sidebar conversations with individual trustees on that, but I would suggest more, present us back your ideas and like, hey, this doesn't work, and we talked to so-and-so, and here's why it doesn't work, and maybe it doesn't. As far as changes in the quarantine, I'd like to see what other districts are doing and how that's worked for them. We know that the change that we made, we've had, I forget what it is, something like 300 or 400 students that would have been subject to quarantine that weren't, and I believe it's 1 or 2 of those later ended up positive.
Yeah.
And we don't know whether their positive was related to their potential exposure or not, or some other exposure. So we know that's been a good change for our district or for our students to keep them in classes, and it hasn't negatively impacted us. Perhaps there's data from another district within our state that's done something. I don't know. And maybe you can't get there. I just ask that you would.
For me, I want to see the numbers the next couple weeks in our district, our kids, our staff, because our numbers have been a little bit different than the total numbers. And like past holidays and such, we have seen our numbers go up. So that's going to be important for me on the 19th. As well as seeing, I mean, I don't know if we can find the information about what other districts do on quarantine with people not wearing masks as opposed to people wearing masks being exposed.
All right, I'm going to ask to call the question. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes. Okay, Dr. Cook, I appreciate, and same with you, Nicole, your time on this. I know there was a lot of hours put together to put this together, and we'll look forward to talking about it again on the 19th and seeing what our numbers look like. Okay, our next agenda item is our high school bell schedule options.
I'm excited to bring Assistant Superintendent Kelly Nichols to the stand to share that information and to describe the work of the committee. So I would like to turn this over to her at this point.
Good evening, trustees. I am happy to share with you guys our first round selections. Currently, where we are in our process of schedule design is we have narrowed 3 options that we wanted to share out to the public for feedback. And so we have our survey currently open right now for feedback. And so I'll share with you what we shared in our survey so that you can see what we're getting feedback on. So first, to review, our schedule is focused on something, the concept of time as a collaborator. So how can we schedule time as a resourceful container for us to engage our students in really meaningful learning? So we wanted to select a schedule that facilitates integral learning experiences. We want to be considerate of differentiated learning needs and schedule preferences. We want to incorporate time for deeper learning and exploration for students and staff, and that we want an accessible program partnership and work opportunities for our students with this new schedule. The integral learning experiences that we're prioritizing is real intentional 4-year planning for student interests and goals, consideration of differentiated learning needs and schedule preferences, and accessible for academic acceleration, program partnerships, and work opportunities. So those are those integral elements that we want to make sure all of our high school students have access to. And that we, although we have not formally adopted our high school graduation requirements, we're not asking for any changes. And we want to make sure that all of our students have access to and accountability for key learning and development in alignment with our Portrait of a Graduate and our graduation requirements. So we have 3 options that we've shared with the public for public feedback. And option A is a rollover AB block. So this is an opportunity where each day rolls over. You have an A day and a B day, and they continually roll. It would probably look familiar for some people who attend a particular high school. And then option A, these were the, I cannot read. We provided opportunities for focus on ways that we think this option is great, and then whereas this option could be a challenge. So I don't want to read through all of them, but all 3 options have opportunities and all 3 options have challenges. They're all available on the survey for further consideration. And then we have an option B, which is a flex mod. This is a really highly adaptive schedule that has a variety of opportunities for block and options for learning via certain days and certain amounts of time. This is just one model of it. If you go to the survey, there's other models that you can reference, but this was the overarching opportunity that incorporates a specialized time that they call crew, which is like an advisory model, and then opportunity for individual learning time, that's the ILT, in addition to comprehensive coursework. And then, again, same things, we have opportunities and challenges. And all three of our options don't compromise those integral learning experiences in the beginning. Sometimes they're a little bit more adaptive, but all three of these options meet our goals. Option C is a 5-period trimester model. So instead of a semester block of time, this is a trimester opportunity. So this has a 5-period day with, or 6-period day with advisory. This particular model has a focused day with what they call a Portrait of a Graduate Wednesday. And so there's dedicated time, again, with advisory and student learning and independent time, in addition to their core content and regular coursework. And then same thing, some good opportunities and some challenges. I want to be really clear here that these are overviews and really basic models. So this has not been detailed by the committee. We have not mapped out actual courses or 4-year plans. These are overviews of blocks of time that we wanted to send out for public feedback. So we're at the very beginning phases of this process. We have real intentional models that are very different, that provide an opportunity for our stakeholders and our students and our families to say, hey, this type of schedule looks really cool. But the finalized schedule that would be presented as a formal proposal might look different and have much more detailed specifics, obviously, because it would be interrogating the specific components for each of our schools and our enrollment and our graduation requirements. So this is a very early on stage of what could be possible. All three of these could go into the trash can based on feedback that we get from our public stakeholders, and our committee might start all over. We don't know. So we'll have an opportunity to review that feedback and look at the options and see about how we would want to move forward and what we would want to move forward with, or what we would want to change based on that public feedback and stakeholder consideration. So I just want to name that these, and for everybody on the record, that this isn't like this is what it's going to be. There's an opportunity for it to look very different. So just an overview, again, generalized comparisons. All three of our options meet all of our goals. There's some nuance with the option A because it's a rolling A/B, it's a static schedule, so you don't get to see your teachers every day, no matter what. And then also in terms of the advisory, there's not a specific or intentional advisory time, but an advisory is absolutely available. And then the other three options have the integral learning experiences, differentiated learning, time for deeper learning for staff and students, and all three options are accessible for our partners. And then here's some overview and details of amount of time. So all three have different options for transitions, but you would have limited transitions in comparison to a traditional context. And then you get to see how many days you have around instruction. Again, you'll see like option B is highly differentiated because it's a really nuanced schedule. And then hours for instructional time, and then academic calendar year hours, and then teacher planning. So you have relatively similar teacher planning across all three schedules. And then again, with that option B, could be 5 courses, or it could be 7. So again, highly nuanced. It could be differentiated. And then all three options have increased credit access than our traditional block. And same thing with electives. So we have 6 electives, between 6 and 9 and 6. And then number of students per teacher. So you have the traditional 120 for option B and C, and then you have 90 daily. And these, again, are overviews and generalizations, so it might not be that specific for every teacher or for every grade level or for each school. And then here, again, is a cost analysis. So this is a generalized model, not detailed, not nuanced, but it is based on 1,300 students, right? And so this would be the increase for our schedule, as is with a particular subset of students in each class and all the courses, course offerings, here's how much extra it would cost. So option A is about $380,000 extra. Option B is $1 million, a lot of extra money. And then option C is $76,000. Again, these are super generalized cost estimates. So it could be more or less if we actually break down some of these schedules more specifically with our enrollment and course offerings.
Is that based on more than the additional 6-period schedule?
Correct.
So that's your cheapest, most cost-effective, and then these are in addition to that?
Correct.
Okay. I wanted to clarify that.
And then that's per school?
Yeah.
Did it? Okay.
No.
Well, I thought you said 1,300 students, so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this is the cost, if you take our current, just a basis cost of having Lake City's schedule and CHS's schedule, the ratio of student minutes to teacher minutes, and how we need to staff just a basic schedule for those two schools. So you add the total of those costs, and then you compare if both schools are on, for example, option C, it's $76,000 more than what we're currently running total at the both schools.
76,000 total, not 76,000 at each school for 100 and
Total.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's make sure we understand this. So you're saying you're counting into this base cost what Lake City's schedule is costing more than CHS's. So really, we should add 380,000 onto it, correct? Because right now there's a discrepancy in the cost of scheduling between Lake City and CHS.
So I shared in the booth the worksheet that might kind of help, just going through that really quickly.
Oh, that's okay. We can do it at the workshop.
Yeah, why don't we do
I
that
think
at
it's
the
an
workshop?
important.
The answer to your question, Trustee May, is yes.
So add 380 to.
Yeah, to the total, like if we
Yes.
were implementing A, it would cost the overall district budget $380,000, yeah.
Yeah, it would be great to have that at the workshop. So I was just going to ask if you didn't already have one, if we could have a breakdown and understanding of where those numbers came from.
And again, we might not be presenting these at the workshop too, right? We might have some shifts in schedules if we continue our according, but we'll break down whatever it is that schedule that's moving forward.
Well, that workshop's in 2 weeks, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't, unless there's some schedule.
Well, we meet on Monday the 12th. Our committee meets on Monday the 12th to review all the survey feedback and then move on to next stages. Okay, so to review, so here we are in our process. So we've spent months focusing on outcomes, student learning. What do we want our students to experience? What do we want them to be able to do and produce? How we want their learning, what we want to hold as priorities for student learning. And then we reviewed many, many options of schedules and had an opportunity to narrow down our options. And we have currently the 3 options that we've put forward for public feedback. And so that's what we're engaging in right now. So we have stakeholder feedback through a survey. And we will review that feedback. We also have specified feedback from our middle school leadership teams. And we will be reviewing that information on Monday, the 12th of April. And based on that review and discussion, we'll establish next steps, which could be an elimination of a particular option, a refinement of all 3 options, an additional option, a whole hybrid option that isn't part of these 3, but based on the feedback and opportunity, who knows? Like there's a whole other layer of design that's possible for us, and that will be determined on the 12th. We could also say, gosh, we need more time. As we've talked about, this is an ambitious timeline. So we'll see with the committee what they discuss and what they think would be best in terms of their next steps moving forward. If we're able to narrow down 1 or 2 options on the 12th, then we'll send back those options out for very focused feedback, and that will have a much more detailed schedule. So it would be incorporative of here's what a 4-year plan could look like with our graduation requirements. Here's what we would have more specifics around cost and the advisory opportunity or not. So all of those details, some more specifics, not super specific, but a much more specific than just this general overview, would then go back out with very specific feedback questions that we want from stakeholders. And then if we're able to get some good feedback, we'll probably be able to formalize a formal schedule for proposal to the board for approval. The earliest that could be would be June, or if we have to delay, it could be September or even beyond. It depends on how the process goes. But that's where we are right now.
I have two questions. One, Dr. Cook, I had sent some questions this weekend, and I don't see them as part of the board packet. So I don't know if those were forwarded or got answered. And it's fine if they weren't. I just would like that followed up on and have that sent out to the board. And then my other question, or I guess this is a request. If you're meeting on the 12th and there is a revision or there's going to be a change and you talked about a survey, my ask would be that that not go out until the board has met on the 19th, and then the board has had a chance to understand and vet those schedules before another survey went out.
Okay.
And if anybody on the board disagrees, please let me know, but that's my ask. So if anybody disagrees, say so.
I do feel as though we're in a stage in this process where we got to make sure that there's a schedule up here that's viable for the 5 of us to determine. And I'm having some discomfort about the 3 options that are listed. So I guess the process, I've heard some confusion on process and what was available. So maybe some clarity on that. I initially a year ago when we started our first workshop sitting in the group, it seemed as though there was agreement that there would be compromise by both schools, and that we wouldn't be asking one school to completely change their schedule. And it seems as though we may be doing that because the only viable option is probably option 1. So I'm worried about that moving forward. Did the modified block schedule not make it anywhere? Or, I heard CHS, they weren't allowed, they didn't think they were allowed to discuss their own schedule or recommend it or put it out there as a possibility. So are these the only 3 options that are what we're going to look at moving forward, I guess is the question.
So, okay, so let's break this down. We had all options available starting early in the process. So our committee has reviewed many, many different types of schedule options. We didn't have any option off the table. And after multiple reviews and conversations, we had teams that represented the district office and KTEC, a team that represented each comprehensive high school, and each of them brought 3 schedule options. So we had 9 total that we narrowed to these top 3. And that was voted upon by the committee. Again, we just sent this out for public feedback. So we could come back and say, we don't really, based on all this feedback, we might want to revisit some of those options or go back to other options. We're in the design phase. So this is just step 1 of the design phase. This wasn't something we were bringing forward for proposal or for consideration. We're just trying to get some feedback and see where our community is based on what we're addressing around our values and what the committee wanted to bring forward.
I agree with Trustee May. I know it's been a while, but I remember talk of the modified block schedule, and so I was surprised. Actually, there were so many schedules that were sent to us. List of schedules actually were quite interesting, and how intricate some of them are. But I thought in the discussions, which we haven't been in a discussion for some time with this committee, so I think that's probably what I don't know. When I saw these 3 options, I thought, how did we come to these 3 options after the meeting, which, mind you, was over a year ago? I don't even remember these besides, option 1, because that's block schedule Lake City. So your teams, were they all intermixed like high schools, or were they specifically broken down like?
Well, when we meet as a committee, we collaborate as a whole team. And then we broke down specifics around the subcommittees for the schedule proposals, and then we voted as a full committee.
Because the survey, I took the survey, and you'll probably be able to get some good information from it, but I'm wondering if it's going to be the right information that people are going to realize. And maybe they were giving that information only just based on those 3 options that they were shown. So I wonder if the survey would have looked different had there been a discussion about more options before sending the survey out. Does that make sense?
And
getting the feedback for the options to move forward. Because I remember answering it like, which one do you like, pick a favorite out of these three. So you pick a favorite out of those three, but would my favorite have been the same had there been three other options? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering what those results are going to give you from just those three options that were presented.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a gazillion schedule opportunities out there, right? And our committee did review a ton
yes.
of schedule
We-
options. And so we've trusted this committee to be representative, to reach out to their school teams, to review and research. That's again why it took us 6 months before we even narrowed it down to one option, or one option for team. So I mean, if you want us to open it back up and just provide a bunch of different options and then try to narrow it from stakeholder feedback, usually this process is more constructive if you trust your representative team to say, hey, we're going to review all these things and here's the rationale of why these are the opportunities, and then get some stakeholder feedback. But again, even with this feedback, we have opportunities for comments where the public could say, or the board could say, we don't like any of these options and we need to review or come to these different consensus, and that's totally fine. We're still very much in the beginning phase of just the design process.
For me, I'd like to see a few more options, specifically the modified block.
Well, when you say modified block, what are you thinking of?
Combines where you're attending all of your classes a couple days a week. I don't remember it specifically. I didn't have it pulled up. And where you also then have a couple days of the block schedule. It seems like a good fit. Maybe it's not, but I would like to see how that worked. With K-Tech, throwing in K-Tech and NIC. And then also with these options, what districts are using these right now? I mean, we're familiar with option one, but what districts nearby us, or maybe not even nearby, or in the state, and how has that looked for them? And are they able to do K-Tech and NIC? I don't know if they have a K-Tech or NIC type thing, but what does that look like? So I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I know there's been a lot of time. I just feel like, I don't know, I know COVID threw everything off as far as meeting and us even meeting with the committee, that it was kind of like nobody even knew where anyone was about, where you were at in this process.
I've been presenting to you guys regularly about where we are in the process.
But not how you got to the three options, because I've heard from lots of different people on the committee, so there's just been different feedback of how the options came about.
So why don't we continue to collect data and information from the feedback that we get from the community, and then at the 19th workshop, we'll coalesce all that information, and if and during that workshop, maybe do some consideration on other options as well, and make sure that we've got the direction that the board would want to go along with what the community is giving us feedback on, and we present that in the workshop model, and we'll go from there.
Can I ask a question, make a comment real quick? The core values, is that was committee driven or admin or?
Committee driven.
So I just wonder if that's where we maybe failed as a board to give some direction to the process, and not recognize that you weren't with us last year when perhaps we talked about this. I know I said it, and I've said it multiple times, I believe Trustee May has, is that neither of the two schools' current schedules are options for me. Because I have serious concerns about both. I think one doesn't offer enough opportunity for electives, and I have major concerns with Lake City's instructional time. And, I'm not going to kick Lake City, but it doesn't, in 6 years I've been on the board, it does not matter the data point, their scores are lower. And I could say a lot more about that, and I'm not going to do that tonight. I'd like to talk about that at the workshop, but instructional minutes on a per credit basis are very critical to me. And some of these options B and C scare me a little bit in that regard. If we were voting tonight, I'd be voting no for any one of them if you were recommending them. Because I have concerns, mainly on instructional minutes. Option B, I think it's super creative. I just wonder, it's just too much for our community. It may be too extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And option C, particularly with where we perform it in math and what we're trying to do in math, it scares me to say, okay, we're going to jam a year's worth of math into 2 trimesters. And then, what if I have math, first and second trimester this year and I have it second and third next year? That's a big gap in math particularly.
Yeah.
And we know the learning loss that happens over summer. Now you're talking, double or triple that time that you could potentially have that gap that,
Yeah.
I just don't see it personally. And the elective or that kind of pride period, like some of the middle schools run or whatever they call that, I appreciate the intent of that. I just think, geez, every day, that's just taking away instructional time. And I don't know that I'm on board with that. I could see it once a week, like some of the middle schools run, but, some of those schedules had it every day.
Yeah.
So those are my concerns, I guess.
Kelly, I worry if we wait 2 more weeks and we continue to get data or more feedback. For me, option B, $1.2 million plus $380,000. It's not a viable option. Our community, we don't have funding for that. I would be curious, Katie's not here right now, but how are we going to write that as a line item into our budget? We're just not. We're going to have to go to the taxpayers for that, and I don't see that being popular. And the trimester has the least instructional hours. And for me, that's just not an option. So that leaves A, which I feel like we had an agreement that we weren't going to ask one school to change because we're already seeing people digging in. We're receiving emails from staff saying, well, why doesn't CHS just keep theirs? And Lake City wants to keep doing theirs. Well, that's what we're trying to fix. We're asking for a collaborative solution. We thought we came up with a plan that said, here's the issue, you guys solve the problem, come to the board with a recommendation that meets the needs of both schools, the community, and is viable financially. And none of those are options. And so do we continue to get feedback on 3 options that aren't viable? That's where I think our conundrum is. Or do we start at this workshop and say, the timeline's not changing, we've waited long enough to make this change. Do we circle our wagons quickly and get some options that are viable? I wonder if that's the direction we need to start heading.
Yeah, so I think all of these things are possible. We're scheduled to meet on April 12th. I can come to the committee on April 12th and say, hey, the board has directed us in these particular ways in which would navigate our next steps. So if there's direction that you want to provide that would help our committee focus on areas that you find financially viable and are interested in pursuing, I think that would something we would appreciate, because we want to design schedules that will be able to be presented to you for approval and consideration. So we're happy to do that. And then again, that would be presented to you on the April 19th, or where we are in the redesign process or revisiting of certain option processes on the 19th. We're happy to do that.
What I would say is I'll respectfully disagree with Trustee May as far as the agreement that we wouldn't use either of the high school schedules. I know that was never voted on. That was never a motion. I know that was sentiment by Trustee Morris Road that neither school should win. I know that there's been sentiment about that, but neither school's options were ever taken off the table. And so my position's always been, if there's a better schedule than what either school is doing, then we need to be doing that for kids. That's always been my position on this. So if you're looking at the 3 options and I'm being told, well, of these 3, what's the best schedule for kids? Well, then I know what my opinion on that is. But I think the disconnect, Kelly, is that this board was always highly involved in what the schedules were, and we were being asked about our input on those schedules. And what happened here is you were reporting to us about meetings and that schedules were out there and that schedules were being narrowed, but we were never given the specifics until it literally came out on a survey. And that was a big pill to swallow, in all candor. And so that's what this board needs, is we need to be on the forefront of those schedules, not on the back end. Because as you can see tonight, that's what happens when we get put on the back end. So that's my concern. And that's what I would say. However you want to formulate your meeting on the 12th, just know this board needs to be on the forefront and not on the back end.
I'm also curious about the rush of the proposal. for June or September, if maybe we need to pause a minute and have meetings and take our time with something as big as a schedule change for our high schools. Because we're looking at this, 2022, 2023, but we want to make a decision.
Well, we need a year of professional development. So if we delay it, that's fine, but then it would delay the implementation another year because we're asking for a significant time to prepare and readjust schedules and course options for our counselors and our incoming students. So I think that's why we held a hopefulness that we would get it by the end of this year, so then it would be established, and then we would be able to go into next year to plan for it. But we also might not be able to make that timeline, and then we would just have to push back the process for implementation.
When we usually make a change of some sort, do we require a year of professional development before we do that? I know how important professional development is, but is it?
Well, it's not just professional development, it's also course mapping and outlining. So if we don't have the schedule in place, yeah.
I mean, I'd like to see us push through on the workshop and see what comes of that, and see if we can't stay on this timeline. We've talked about this forever, it feels like to me, as a board, or at least multiple years we've talked about this. I think even prior to the curriculum audit, it was discussed to some degree. And so, we're talking 3 or 4 years that we've talked about this. So I would like to see us, let's meet. We have our workshop scheduled already on the 19th. Let's see what comes of it and go from there.
Dr. Cook.
I would agree as far as that. I think someone called it a 7. I think in your guys' proposals, it was
the 7-period modified block.
7-period modified block to me.
Thank you.
That
I didn't know the
seems
specific name.
that seems the most viable to me.
Okay, so you're asking to have that as an option to consider. We can do that.
I would at least like to hear more about it at the workshop.
Dr. Cook, something that I need to hear, I think at the workshop would be, we saw some data points today between the two schools, and I need to understand more if that's based on the two schools being very different and their schedules being different, or if that's based on something else. And so, because right now we're seeing data that's very different between our two high schools, and I need to understand, is that based on their schedule, or is that based on something else? So.
We can elaborate upon that data and maybe do a little bit of disaggregating so it's a little more trackable, just so that there's a little bigger picture of what that data might look like. And Chair Brumley, if I may, I just, in a brief conversation with Ms. Town that happened with just eyes, we realized that there was a miscommunication, and I apologize. Those questions are now in your board book. They were answered earlier today. I take full responsibility for that, so I'm very sorry.
Okay, I'm just glad they're there. Thank you, Dr. Cook. I'm just glad they're there, and I just wanted to follow up if they hadn't.
And I'm wondering if moving forward, I know on other committees we've had board representation, and maybe that's the case because before everything happened and changed, we were kind of meeting regularly. And so I think I'm wondering what that would look like, and I would offer my time if that's something that you guys would think would be. I always, when you're on the committees, you get to actually see and hear and everything that's going on. So it makes it just, I don't know, it's just much better. And then when we're having these conversations and being able to report back and share that, like you two attended and you were able to share what you saw, I just think it makes a little bit of a difference. So I'm not sure what you all think, but
Chair Brumley, we would
even you guys, the
we
committee.
would invite that participation. This is, as you all know, this is a very difficult and delicate kind of walk, and in some cases on very hallowed ground. And so we want to make sure that we're doing our best to represent the voices of everybody that has an interest in this. And I think having more people there with us in that journey would be a wise decision by our community. And we would love to have, even to the extent of two of you
Yeah, I was thinking two
from
as
the
well.
board to participate with this conversation, would build tremendous context with the committee and would give a different level of voice to it. So this would, I still think it's wise at this point to give administration the shot to try to resolve this issue, and perhaps having board members serve in a kind of an ad hoc, or as a, not ad hoc, but maybe as a representative, maybe non-voting member, but with the ability to answer very difficult and hard questions as we try to resolve this issue and try to hit a pretty aggressive timeline. And so that would be, we would welcome that.
Yeah, and from my perspective, it's really just the listening in and the seeing everything that's going on. I know it made a world of difference when we were changing boundaries and different things to see in the discussions, and it helps when community members email us or come to us with questions and stuff that, you know, at that time we actually have information because we're like, hey, we've been in these meetings, so this is what's going on, this is kind of where they're at, instead of, you know, we're not really sure, we're waiting to get an update type thing. So for me, it's more just the not voting, sitting back, listening, being able to see everything and hear the conversations and whatnot. So if anyone else would like.
Yeah, my suggestion would be that Trustee Pickford and Trustee May attend the meeting on the 12th in an effort to get that started. And then if that needs to change, then
Do you know what time your meeting
3
is?
to 4:30.
Okay.
We have a hearing that day?
actually, I'm not part of that hearing, so it wasn't on my radar, but. Okay, do we have any further discussion on this topic? Okay, if not, we'll move on, hopefully quickly, because I know people are anxious to get out of here. So Dr. Cook, how about fundraising policy?
Just real quick, I'm sorry to step back. For our workshop, I know we're going to be, we deferred Mass to the 19th also, and the schedule. I would just request, I think we need an hour plus, maybe an hour and a half on schedule. So whatever you think's appropriate on Mass, if we need to plan a little extra time for
Okay.
workshop. Usually we're 2 hours, so I'm just saying, do we need 2.5 hours or something?
Well, my suggestion would be, unless the board or admin disagrees, is that we just leave that meeting starting at 5 and ending when it needs to end. Okay. Fundraising policy.
Thank you, Chair Brumley. At this point, I'd like I would like to introduce Kate Kiner to I'm trying to check the game maybe, to start talking about. If you recall, we had a fundraiser kind of conflict at some point. We had a lot of mixed information, and so we promised to address those circumstances and to listen and to take input, and then to come back in front of the board to present some of the either updates, recommendations, or changes, and we're at that point in the year, so I'd like to turn it over to Kate at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. Good evening, Chair Brumley, members of the board, our SAG. You guys are rock stars for hanging in there tonight, and Dr. Cook. Thanks for giving me just a couple minutes to touch base. I know that we have policies for information coming up, but I did want to circle back and inform you of kind of our journey this year. So when last year we discovered that there was confusion around some existing board policies, we promised to support our Spark committee members, members of our PTAs, PTOs, and community groups that come together to meet and work really hard. I think that's why I mostly wanted some time in front of you, is just to appreciate the people that volunteer to be leaders and even participants in our PTOs and PTAs. They're amazing people. But to support them, not just through following the policies that we have in place, but also through COVID fundraising, and that has been its own challenge. And so this year, we had some exceptions to our policies that we allowed. Those were things like you could do grade level competitions or incentives. So maybe a whole grade level that raised a certain amount could have a pizza party, or you could do class level incentives and competitions, or you could do whole school. My kids all go to Nexa, and they had a calendar fundraiser, and if they raised a certain dollar amount, which they exceeded, it was hugely successful, the whole school incentive was that the principal and vice principal, Mr. Rutherford and Mrs. Weinberger, had balloons popped over their head with something that was very, very satisfying for my own kids. They were very excited about that. I think it was shaving cream or maybe whipped cream. So that's an example of some of the exceptions that we had this year. We also asked that companies be a little bit more transparent about what % of the money families were raising for these fundraisers, what went directly to the organization or to the school versus overhead costs or supply costs and things like that. So we operated through that. We created a subcommittee that met a couple times, but it also kind of bled into our monthly Spark meetings where we had these conversations and really just shared ideas, shared successes, talked about some of the things that we were facing and how we could move forward, and some of the things that have been traditions for decades, if we can't do them in person, which happened a lot this year. And so circling back around with the committee, we would like to request the change in the language that's up in front of you today that just sort of makes those what were exceptions this year permanent. That was that we could do some incentives between, that it didn't reach the individual level or didn't single out kids based on their ability to contribute or not contribute, which we felt this met that, and that we make permanent the requirement that outside organizations be transparent in the % of money that actually benefits the school or the PTO.
And I would just like to remind our board that we actually talked about this about a year ago, I think, and really what we were doing was just clarifying language in which, so that where we had questions in how they were being administered, both by either PTA membership and leadership or by schools and administrators, that language just became a little more clarified. And so we kind of piloted that this year, and I would tell you that Mrs. Kinder's support of our schools and of those committees has been tremendous this year in helping them to kind of understand and get a little better consistency in the delivery of that language. So.
All right, anybody have questions or comments for Kate?
I'd just like to say I appreciate the way you tackled it. It's pretty simple language, but I think it makes it pretty clear, and I think it's a good point for, or a good place for simple language. Sometimes our policy gets so wordy and confusing. The only question I have, and it's probably just because I don't fully understand the two policies, but the language that was added to policy 2 about external entities fundraising. To me, that reads like that's kind of non-PTO type stuff. That's Kiwanis comes along and says, hey, we want to raise money to build you a new baseball field or whatever it is, and that it would apply to them. I'm just wondering if we need that same language in the kind of more PTO section area, just because I think some of the ones that raised concerns for us were really PTO-sponsored events where they were farming out to whatever XYZ company, and 50% of the money was going to that company and 50% was going to school, or whatever the split was. Like, that's where I would like to see that language with the PTO as well. So if the PTO is doing a fundraiser and maybe it's covered there, I don't know. If you guys talked about that, or if I'm just making it too complicated.
No, I hear what you're saying. We use the term external entity here as that kind of example of if I wanted to do a fundraiser and it was with Mod Pizza, that they, for example, my PTA could sponsor that fundraiser. People could purchase pizza, and that Mod Pizza would say, well, 20% of the profit from the sale of this pizza goes to the school. And so that was the intent behind that language.
I just wonder.
So maybe it's what does external entity, or what exactly are we referring to? Because there's also another example with the American Heart Association does the Jump for Life. None of that goes to the school, and it's all an external fundraiser. That because one of our goals in having fundraisers is to kind of foster that sense of community and citizenship in our students, that they can do things for outside causes. So that would be an example, I think, of something that doesn't benefit the school necessarily, but enriches students.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just look at external entities, kind of non-school related, right? And PTO they kind of fall under the school umbrella to me. And I don't know, if I'm PTA fundraiser coordinator and I want to see what I can do, I'm going to go look at policy 4200, and I'm not going to look at the other one. So that would be my, I guess, only ask that we incorporate that language from 7325 into 4200P.
I don't disagree with that. I think that's a good suggestion.
And we're functioning under the assumption that this will come back next month for action for the board.
So that's something maybe, I don't know if Spark meets between now and then, but that you guys could just talk about?
Sure. So the request or the suggestion is that we move the transparency of the percent raised be moved over to the 4,200.
I would say that be in both places. And
in both places, that it's added in both
maybe
places.
That it says,
perfect.
Instead of external entity clearly states, it says PTO.
No problem.
Clearly
Yeah,
states
that would
blah,
give
blah, blah,
more
blah.
clarity to both types. Okay.
All right, any other comments? Thank you very much, Kate. All right, then our next agenda item is policies for information. There are 4, well, there's actually 5, but 2 procedures and 3 policies. Does anyone have comment? We know we'll see these back next month. These will go out for 30 days, and then we would approve next month, absent concerns in doing so. Okay, hearing nothing, then we will see these back next month, Dr. Cook and Ms. Town. And our almost last agenda item, boundary discussion with Lakeland School District.
So really, this is just a report from me. I just wanted to let you all know that administration from the Lakeland School District met with us a couple weeks ago to discuss smoothing out our northern boundary a little bit with some suggested modifications on both the northeast corner of our northern boundary and the northwest kind of edge of our boundary. And if you recall, and we'll have much more about this later, but essentially there's some wonky little annexes that have happened years and years ago, and the discussion would be really to talk about smoothing that out. And it would, we tend to believe that this might be beneficial to both districts, and there is an interest to have their board have a discussion about whether or not they're supportive of that, and we would like to bring that to this board to in a future date, in a really relatively soon future date, to actually look at what those changes would be recommended and really just kind of take the next steps. Administration kind of came to a place where we believe that there's some amenable language in how that would be changed. Quickly, the benefit just very quickly would be that on the west edge, the acreage that the district now owns, the 40 acres, would not be on the edge of the boundary of the district. It would actually be, the boundary of the district would move a little farther north in the northwest corner. And we would show that in maps. We will release those maps to you probably in the next few days. And as we start to have that discussion collectively with the board and just kind of looping you into that conversation. At one point, we thought we might be drawing up a resolution. Legal said there's really no point for that. And so both boards seem at least amenable to the conversation at this point. And so I just wanted to inform the board that we'd be moving forward with those next steps. So hopefully that could be in front of you as early as the next meeting.
And I can't recall, Dr. Cook, were you in the district when we did that with Post Falls? Or was that right before you?
It was, I came in the middle of that transition.
Because I think we ended up at one point, we had a joint meeting where both boards, we met here together to kind of finalize that.
Yeah, and I think there's procedurally, there's a couple of different ways we can go, and right now we're leaning towards the similar procedure as that was done I think 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, with those conversations with the post-fall school board. And if it seems to be the most likely path forward, there's a few hundred acres that would be discussed on both sides. And so at some point there would have to be a joint meeting in which those the losses and gains that each district would experience would be analyzed and looked at, and we would present that. Both administrative teams would present that to both boards.
Yeah, it seems like both areas are in imminent development status. They don't, for the most part, have students associated with them now, which is different than Post Falls. We had some, not a significant amount, but they will shortly.
Right.
There's apartments going up on one of them right now. So.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a want to get this moving along before it does get much more complicated with as those housing additions start to get built out. And so I think both districts, or at least both administrations, are interested in pursuing this and getting a decision made and then presented to the state board so for their consideration if that's the result.
All right, thank you, Dr. Cook. Our last agenda item is just the superintendent search process update, and the board is going to be interviewing semifinalists and then finalists in the upcoming couple weeks, and hopefully announcing a new superintendent by the end of the month. And then we have a bunch of dates coming up that everybody has in front of them that I will not walk through. We got lots of meetings though. And so with that, we will adjourn.